All right, well, welcome everybody. Glad to see you all here. This is cool to see everybody um, dropping in. We have people out in American Samoa right now who are zooming in, so that's pretty wild. You don't have that every day, so that's cool. People from all over, and a lot of people down here in Shasta in the dorms, and you know, just around. So that's kind of great. So it's nice to see everybody, um, and glad to see that the weather's clearing up too. So I hope you guys were able to get outside and take in some nice oxygen and start to detox a little bit. I still feel a little bit kind of hunched over and kind of uptight and creeped out because of all this crazy smoke and everything, but it's feeling good. So I'm Miles Inada, and I'm one of the professors of the class, along with Jeffrey
Hi,
Sutter.
I'm Jeffrey. Yeah. And I'm also one of the
Wow.
professors of the class. And we also both have a recitation.
Cool. And our other two professors our EMDA professors are Bobby Ariano and David Bethel. And they'll be dropping in as they can. David Bethel, I'll just tell you a little bit about them. I'll kind of virtually introduce them here. David Bethel is he's an artist who his background is in composition. And Jeffrey and I will talk about ourselves a little bit here coming up, but his background is in music and composition. So he was a trumpet player. He actually has a PhD in music composition from Berkeley, and has taught pretty extensively in music, but his practice and his art really revolves around a lot of performance and digital technologies being incorporated into performance, and a lot of cross media animation, dance, projection, physical invention, things like that. And then Bobby Ariano is a writer, kind of by trade originally, and he's a novelist and has several published novels, and also nonfiction writer, and just kind of writer, so he's got that cool, like, if you've got a pencil and a piece of paper, I'm ready to go kind of background. But he also teaches classes here in non-linear writing, so writing for interactive media, and so, and also has done a lot of work with film and video as well. So, and I'll just talk about myself for a second, and or we can get into it. Maybe Jeffrey and I can introduce ourselves as we go into kind of the work that we do as we move into it.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So for those of you who are not already EMDA majors, we're a department called EMDA, Emerging Media and Digital Arts. A lot of you probably know this, but and so the four full-time professors in EMDA are Miles and myself, Bobby, and David. And so we all each have kind of our own specialty, and so our specialty kind of dictates what classes we teach and the kind of students we talk to and sort of mentor and work with. And all four of us are in this class, and you'll see all four of us throughout this class. Whether it's in the recitations or them dropping by in lectures, you'll get to kind of meet us and kind of sort of have a hook into the department and know, how to contact the cool, music person who also has a seat in the music department, who, if that's one of your interests, you can talk to them. And we're all friendly. So, whatever your interest is, I think each of us kind of has some of our tendrils in different fields and like different practices. Miles is really good at 3D animation stuff, for example.
Cool. Yeah, and so what we'll be talking about today is we're gonna, for the lectures, what we want to do is we want to have kind of an overarching theme that we talk about, and we're going to be pretty casual about it, today, and we're going to have kind of a discussion. Jeffrey and I are going to talk about this, and And then we'll have an opportunity for you guys to ask questions towards the end of it. And then we'll have some breakouts. We'll do some activities with you guys. So we're going to desperately try not to talk at you for 2 hours on Mondays. So we'll make it, kind of break it up. But this is a very active class. So I loved that Quinn's question, like, what's the homework for this class? And that, in a way, that is the question. And, that you can kind of keep asking yourself that question, because ideally, this is the kind of thing where there should be kind of, if there are 100 students in this class, there should be 100 different types of homework happening, in a way that this class is about kind of exploring and starting to develop your own connection with the tools, with the process, that everyone has a different process. And just like we were saying, just between the professors that we've talked about here, we all have pretty radically different backgrounds in some ways. Not radically, maybe, but pretty different backgrounds and different approaches to the medium, And, think about it generationally. Like we were saying, Jeffrey's, 3 years younger than me. No, he's quite a bit younger, and so the generations that we're coming from really influence the history and the background that we've had. People coming from different locations, from different places. All of this is important, and this is something that we really want to develop. And I guess we can take a second. Let's just take a look at the syllabus. I can share that up here. And where is the old syllabus? Here. And I'll throw this on the screen. Whoops, I won't do it that way. I'll do it this way. Share screen.
Also, if any of you have questions when one of us is speaking, feel free to drop them in the chat, because Miles or I will watch them. So just cool. So you know we're watching that space.
That's great. Yeah, and if you guys have questions or discussion, if you want to have in the chat's great. If you guys want to, be rocking the chat, that's cool. So this is, can people see this, the syllabus up here?
Yep.
Yes.
I'm going to read every word of it now. So no, I'm not. So the syllabus, we have basically, as we were talking about this, there are 3 questions, or 3 kind of concepts that we've kind of wanted to revolve this around. And the first one, if you look up here, is these are the 3 here, is about you individually. Where have you been? Where are you going? And why are you headed there? So that's one way to put it. That one of the questions is that it's kind of about identity somewhat, and how you are, whatever we show you, if we show you how to use the pen tool, or we show you how to use 3D, or we teach you how to code or something like that, those things are always going to be, you're the one who's going to be doing those things and developing your own relationship to those things. And who you are is going to be hugely important. There's not one way to do all of this stuff. And your experiences and your own desires are a huge part of that. Jeffrey, did you want to add to that at all about the you part?
Yeah, and one thing is that in this class today, when Miles and I are starting to give the, kind of first discussion, we'll often be sharing other artists, other like creative people and practitioners. And the point of us sharing those people is so that you can, compare yourself to them in the best way possible. Not necessarily in terms of quality of maybe their output, but in terms of how they think and what it is that they do, and how they understand how they begin or end a project, or what field they're working in, whether you kind of gravitate towards that. So even when we show you other things throughout history or other like contemporary artists, it's kind of a way for you to reflect on what those people are doing, and then think about your own path in relationship to them.
Great. That's so important. Yeah, I mean, I just second that emotion very deeply, that And we'll be talking about that later on today. Great. And so the second thing is the computer, right? So this is emerging media and digital arts. And so all of us here in some way are interested in using the computer as a tool or as a part of our creative process. And there are so many freaking ways to do that. I mean, and everyone's going to have a different relationship with that. Some people are going to be very heavily analog, in their lives, and that, and their practice will be heavily analog. And the computer, but then how does the computer fit into that? And then being introduced to the computer, one of the things I think maybe you've already had this experience just starting on Wednesday. You might have said, what's this Figma thing? That's weird. I've never heard about this. I wonder how this might be relevant to me, even as someone who doesn't use the computer all the time. So that the computer, it's something, it's not a fixed entity. And sometimes that's bad. Like I was saying, back in my day when I was in, college or something, if I went and I took a book off the shelf, like the dictionary, to look a word up, the book didn't transform into a video game. like I'm sure we've all had that experience, right? Where you've gone to look something up, like, oh, I need to look this thing up for my homework here. And you go, and then all of a sudden you're like
distracted.
Yeah, you're into some kind of like, trying to build your, character builder or something. You're just off into some other universe. So that relationship with the computer is really important. So Jeffrey?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody today, like in this class, has an existing relationship with their computer or computers. Probably, I mean, more likely more than one, including your phone or tablet. And the ways in which artists have used computers have been really different. And so we want to share some of those ways with you. And also, yeah, speaking to what Miles was saying about discipline, and also just about, the internet and global networks are part of the computer now. So, part of having a good creative relationship with your computer is actually creating things on your computer, maybe more than consuming things, or just trying to understand how, like, what is the difference between creating something and consuming something on your machine, and like how you can manage that for yourself. So that, and also just we'll be sharing with you a lot of the different creative fields and how they use different software and what their sort of processes are. And those are really changing processes. So like Figma, for example, is a piece of software that is now pretty ubiquitous, but only just in the last 2 or 3 years. But any job that you get as a designer in like a cool company, like if you're in Silicon Valley and you're working on UX designs or whatever, Figma has kind of become the status quo for that. And in 2 or 3 years, there might be something else, right? So part of developing a creative relationship with your computer is also being willing to always learn new things and kind of also being up to date without getting distracted or falling into those holes of distraction all the time, right?
Yeah.
There was a period of time, maybe there's kind of a sweet spot of computation, I would say. And that was kind of before electronic computers. And during that time, every computer has a clock inside, right? And probably the clock that you use throughout the day now, like how you check what time it is on your phone or on a computer, right? That's connected to the internet. There was a point in time in which there was, no clock, no computer connected to your clock, but you would still have like a clock, like a analog clock. And so people would, sounds kind of crazy, but people would sit down, they would like look at what time it was, and they would be like, okay, I'm going to like, when the hand hits here, I'm going to like stop doing my like stop writing my letters. Like that's like my inbox time, and people did a lot of serious work this way. I mean, this is like how, like, how a lot of the geniuses, that built our modern world kind of worked, right? They worked off of analog clocks, timing themselves and switching different things throughout the day through scheduling. And they took, writing a letter very seriously, and they thought of that as like sending out important information. And it was. Like we don't do that anymore. We're stuck with the computer as a way of talking and speaking to each other. And so we're also stuck with figuring out how to take it seriously, how to have fun with it, how to feel when, you've been using it too much, or, how to feel, what to feel like when you feel like you may have been left behind by a certain technology. There's all these really complex things associated with these machines. And so part of this class is just understanding what your connection to that is and how you kind of see yourself relating to the computer. It's one thing to be an illustrator, or let's say a digital painter, and have an iPad with Procreate, and that can kind of be your whole kind of relationship to the computer, sort of like a consumer endpoint, right? Just a user of a tool that someone else produces that you're really happy with. But then you might also be, somebody else might be extremely political, and let's say they only use Linux and they only like to use free software, and so they have a very different relationship to what it even means to run a program, because they have ethics that surround that. So it can be a really complex space, and it's always changing. I guess part of that is the third point for the class is living in a culture of collaboration. This is kind of an easy one, but we're so connected now. And one of the things that Figma kind of has, the software that we're using in the class, is that it has this multiplayer feature. And almost every new creative software program that's being designed right now that will replace kind of the Adobe suite or other programs, or be upgrades to those things, are going to have features related to that. So we're entering into a future of multiplayer creative software. And so part of this class is just kind of understanding that, and kind of, probably a lot of you play computer games or Steam games, so you're used to multiplayer. And that's probably good, because a lot of those dynamics are going to eventually be in all the software you use.
That's great. Yeah, and I think too, again, I'm thinking about kind of the absurdity of like when I look back at my experience and how different your experience is, I think, as students now. But that collaboration, I mean, in a sense, you guys are growing up in the golden age of that, where it's literally being forced upon us all. I mean, because Zoom, which we're doing this class over, is like just exactly what Jeffrey was saying. It's a collaborative piece of software. So this is all happening on a computer. So, and it's funny to think, I love Jeffrey's example of the clock, of the analog clock, where, and I was just laughing about that because, how many of you guys have been woken up by a text, or a DM from something, or you've left your phone on and you get that and you're like, oh, like back in the olden days, that'd be the equivalent of like some guy running into your room and saying, oh, I've got an urgent letter for you, and holding up this piece of paper in front of your face. Like, and it might be the piece of paper would say, hey, what's up? Like that didn't happen. In other words, like that just literally never would happen. You wouldn't have some guy in a powdered wig and gold buttons running into your room and holding up a piece of parchment in front of your face. But for us, this thing is like, we're kind of living and breathing in this. And the good news I think about that for you guys is that it's kind of organically kind of integrated. That's also the bad news. But the good news about that, I think, is that a lot of times that's where the opportunities are, is because you, like Jeffrey was saying, I love that idea that because you've all grown up, probably most of you have played Fortnite or something, or some kind of, equivalent multiplayer game. You kind of get what that is in a way that someone from my generation, I'm always surprised when I talk to my friends. I'm still relatively connected to this stuff because of you, because I teach and that's the subject that I'm interested in. But geez, if I talk to my other friends, who are not doing this kind of thing, they're like, what? So, but a lot of times that's the opportunity that you have as as innovators and as people coming right out of that experience.
Yeah, and there's kind of this interesting phenomenon with the computer is like, old enough now so that there's been a couple generations of computer kind of cultures and workers. And one phenomenon that you see is that as each generation kind of passes on and sort of dies off, they create new software for the generation underneath them. And the software that they use tends to kind of be abandoned,
Mm-hmm.
And so we're entering a shift right now in which the software, that's the sort of single player kind of, big software like Photoshop that takes 30 seconds to load, though that generation is kind of aging out, and
Absolutely.
new things are being built, and a lot of the opportunities to get jobs in design or are not only going to be using that stuff but working on that stuff.
Mm.
The best jobs are going to be like working on or kind of with the people who make that stuff. And so just to kind of just another kind of little short bit about EMDA is that our approach in EMDA isn't just to teach you how to use software, but actually the things that Miles and I are talking about right now, like, thinking, if you were in another class right now and we were talking about Zoom, you might think that we're kind of wasting time, but like EMDA like is about Zoom. Like this is like the stuff that we think about. These are the tools that we're using, and we think about how they're designed. We think about ways in which they could be designed differently, and we think about how to use them in creative ways. So this is a class in which it's perfectly acceptable to like complain or talk about this stuff, because this is like the department in which we can do that, which is kind of fun, exciting to me because I'm always interested in that stuff.
Awesome.
And of course, the better you're thinking about that stuff, the better your ideas are going to be for your creative projects. And so maybe we should get to talking a little bit about that. Is there anything else in the syllabus that you wanted to go over?
I don't think so. At some point, I don't think we have to do it today, but I would like to go and look at that quote that is in the syllabus. But I think we can do that. Let's do that. We'll save that for another day. But that would be something that if you want to take a look at that quote, I think it's a really great quote. And I think we can come back to it when we start talking about imagery more particularly. I think today we're really going to be talking more about we're going to zoom out even farther from just thinking about imagery to kind of a bigger picture. Cool. So one last thing, just to say, and then we'll get into the conversation here, is this is an active listening class. So the conversations that we're having here, that Jeffrey and I are talking about, the topics that we're going to introduce and discuss, there are things, and I love what I'm seeing already in the chat, that people are starting to drop things into the chat, links. That's awesome. And so, you can be scribbling, doodling, whatever it is that you do, whether that's in your notebook, in Figma directly, on another piece of software, if you got Procreate or something on your iPad, like whatever. This is really, the lectures should be that kind of active listening time, because what we'll do is when we break out, we'll have some discussion, because it's kind of hard just to sit here and listen to people prattle on, sometimes you kind of want to get involved with it. So we'll have the discussion will kind of be about what you've been thinking about or what's been activating for you, or questions that you have that are coming up. So, and there will be continuity, I think, like Jeffrey was saying, kind of between week to week to week. And really during the course of the entire year, we're going to be covering quite a bit of like, this is stuff that's happening today, like right now in the world. And how do you become a part of that, and how you relate to that is really the subject of the class. So, and cool. All right.
Great. Are there any kind of big, quick questions before Miles and I get started on our topic for today? Probably talk for about a half hour.
Yeah.
And if you have questions while we're talking, you can throw them in the chat.
I actually have one question.
Sure.
So I was, because I can't really, for some reason, I can't download Figma on on the desktop. I've been trying to find one on for my iPad, and the only thing that's on is Figma Mirror. Is it similar to the actual one on the desktop? And can I download it?
I believe Figma Mirror is like for presentations,
Oh.
kind of like a screen sharing sort of thing.
Mm.
Um, if you're having trouble downloading, uh, what's the problem downloading Figma? Just what's been like 5 seconds on it.
Uh, I'm not sure. Maybe it's because of the desktop that I have.
Okay.
Kinda
Yeah. I
old,
mean,
so.
gotcha. So personally, I haven't downloaded Figma. I just use it in a browser and I use it in Google Chrome because you don't have to download it. You can just use it as a website. So you can try just using it as a website. I know when you go to Figma's homepage, they have a downloadable version, but it's exactly the same.
Okay. All right.
So give that a try. And if that doesn't work, then email your recitation professor or me, and I'll help you out, and we'll get you kind of up to speed.
Okay.
Yeah, Lita, if you go ahead.
Oh, and so for today, when we're talking, just take notes by hand, which I'm doing too. And those of you who are already in Figma and have your document ready, and and you're ready to start adding stuff, as you're listening to some of what we're talking about, hopefully already you might even be writing down some notes or thinking about some interesting ideas.
How do you erase stuff when you're in Figma? Because I've been trying to find like the eraser, but I can't.
Aha.
On the top left of the screen, there's a little sort of arrow, kind of a paper plane looking tool.
Yeah.
That's the tool that you use to select stuff, and then you can select it and then delete it with the delete key, or right click and delete it. It's not really an application in which you can erase things. It runs off a different model of how to build stuff. We'll talk about that eventually.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Sure. Yep.
Do you guys have like a suggestion of like a tablet to buy to be able to use Figma? Because I've been using my mouse pad and it looks pretty bad. So I didn't know if there was something I could get to make it look better.
If you have a like a trackpad, like hang on, let me get out mine, kind of like this, and a stylus of some sort. Like I have a like the kind of cheap stylus you would purchase to use on like your phone or tablet or whatever. That stylus and this kind of trackpad works in a pinch if you can't get a drawing tablet or a iPad or tablet like that.
It also really depends on like your
need. I use a stylus on my laptop at the time. On the mouse pad, and I was able to use Photoshop pretty well by using that as a mock drawing pad.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that, Quinn.
I have a Wacom tablet. I just have like a small one. It doesn't have like a drawing screen or anything on that. And it works pretty well. Like it has, touch sensitivity and that sort of thing, and like pressure sensitivity. So I mean, it's like if you have $100 and, it's not like the top of the line kind of thing, but I find that works just fine. Like just a small standard tablet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would just throw out there that I don't think you have to get the best thing right away when you're first using it. I think that just in general with gear, anything that's gear related, like if you take up mountain biking or, skiing or something, I would just get something that gets you out and doing it. And so I think that I've seen tablets for like 30 or 40 bucks, so I would probably just grab one of those and just try it out, and then see if there are things that annoy you about it. And like, cause a lot of times when I start doing something, I have no idea if it's good or not. And then, you almost have to have some experience of not, liking something, and then you can like it. I just noticed that the other day I was out hiking, and I just got my first pair of like approach shoes, and I was like, these shoes are so great. Oh my God, this is incredible. I'm not slipping and falling in all these difficult places that I used to, because I've been doing all this hiking for like a year. And so now I can appreciate it. But if I'd had these shoes the first day, I'd be like, okay, whatever, they're shoes, So I think going cheap early is great. Like, especially like $30, who cares,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Cynthia, I see that you have a question. And I just wanted to let everyone know that there's 97 people in this Zoom call. And I see you're raising your hand, which is really cool, but there's a feature in Zoom where you can like virtually raise your hand. I don't know if you know how to access it, but if you open up the chat, you'll see there's this little thing where you can raise your hand. And so if people are raising their hands physically, it's possible with this many people that we won't see you. And Cynthia, I saw your question, I'd probably, because I was lucky. But yeah, what's your question?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know where the virtual one is.
That's okay. Yeah, I'm just letting everybody know so that I don't miss questions.
Where is it at for future reference? Like
you open up the chat.
Yeah.
Do you know how to access the chat? And then there's a little blue.
Mine's open already.
Yeah, so underneath the participants list. Oh yeah, open up participants. Sorry,
oh,
not the chat.
Okay.
It's at the bottom of participants.
Okay, that's cool.
And if you have participants and chat open at the same time, it becomes like this one flowy column.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Gotcha.
And this is good. I think that. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, you had a question. So.
Yeah. What's up?
Oh,
Cynthia?
it was just in response to what Tam was saying. I was gonna ask what computer they have.
So just for a sec, because we do have 100 people in here. These are great questions. These are super important. And so maybe this is something that you guys can we can have this conversation kind of on the chat at first, but we do want to come back to it. Like we'd be happy to geek out and get into this because this is great. But maybe what we should do is we'll go on, but keep these questions coming. And on the chat, you guys can start to just like cross converse in the chat is great. And that way you can get links and suggestions and all that stuff is awesome. I mean, and it's kind of hard. I think what we'll do is we'll have the stuff we're going to talk about. And then at the end, we'll have some breakouts to talk. And then we can kind of come back and have these questions kind of all at once, so to speak, so that we're getting into it. So if that makes sense.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Cool. All right, awesome. Thanks. This is great. Yeah. But anything else? I mean, because these are kind of the real questions. Oh, also, do we have the Discord set up for this, Jeffrey? I think we forgot to do that. We haven't really.
Yeah, we haven't set up Discord yet for this class, but we'll create like a persistent space. We have a EMDA. We'll create a Discord for the whole art department that we set up last term. And so as as you get to know each other, that's a cool hangout space for everyone. So we'll send an invite link pretty soon to that.
Yeah, because these questions are great, and the links, just throwing stuff in, this is perfect. So yeah, you can have a whole other conversation going on. So yeah, cool. And in the labs and the recitations, these are great too. So cool. Nice. So yeah, keep throwing questions in there, and then afterwards we should have time that we can hang out and like Lita, I'd like to take a look at we can screen share and do stuff. We can do breakouts and try to solve some of these problems for you guys to help you out with that. So, great. All right. Well, I think Jeffrey and I, when we talked about this, we wanted to introduce a lot of the ideas that we're talking about. There's really big picture ideas that we'll be working on for the whole year. You'll be working on for the rest of your life. And we kind of came up with a series of questions that we're going to ask each other. But really, we want you also to be asking these questions to yourself and to each other. So the questions we're going to be asking right now to each other are really meant for you to give you some kind of a start into thinking about your own work, and as a way to start getting to know other people's work and getting to understand other people, and as a basis for collaboration. So we'll just go ahead and jump in. But as we're going, take notes, keep chatting, and be thinking about, because in about a half an hour, you're going to be asking each other questions similar to these. They don't have to be these exact questions, but it's meant to kind of be a spark or a prompt for your own discussions and experiments. Cool. All right.
So,
yeah,
I guess we can get started.
let's do it.
So for this class, I think everyone's kind of a little bit on the same page now. You understand that what you're creating in this class is a kind of a digital notebook. What that's going to be is a Figma document that you add to throughout the term. The way in which you use that notebook is going to depend on what you're learning in the class and and the different activities that we do. But your approach to how you organize that and sort of how you find your way and what interests you have is yours. So at the end of the term, you're basically going to be graded on this document. But you're not going to be graded on it in a way in which we're looking for like the coolest looking thing. Although if you want to make the coolest looking thing and that's what you're interested in, that's what we'd like you to do. You know, we're not going to be grading it on the best theory, but if you're really interested in thinking about technology and reading a lot of articles and essays and have cool theories, then we want you to do that. So part of keeping a digital notebook or kind of forcing this upon you is so that you can actually kind of understand what is it that you actually want to use it for. And, you know, digital notebook, journal, sketchbook, these are all terms that we use for like, you know, like a book, like a blank book. And they're kind of like genres, you know, so like when you watch a movie, you have like an action movie, you have a documentary, right? Like when you have a blank book, like what are the genres of that book, you know? Sketchbook, journal, diary, you know, like accounting book, right? Like there's these different ways in which you can think about how you might treat that book and what discipline you might apply to it. And so Miles and I would like to talk a little bit about sketchbooks. We're both artists, but also just how we use a sketchbook and how fluid that is. And so as we're discussing this, we encourage you to also just think to yourself and write down notes and different ideas. Like do you have a sketchbook right now? Is it digital or not? If you don't have a sketchbook, do you do anything that's sketchbook-like? Do you have a regular activity in which you draw or make notes, and how do those notes come out, and how are they useful to you? Yeah, so I guess the first question I have for Miles is, how is your sketchbook or notebook useful to you, and do you carry one with you, or what's your lifestyle with a notebook or sketchbook?
Well, I think it's really changed a lot, and it changes depending on my mood or what I'm doing in my practice. I've noticed that I have times where I'm really into production on something, and I've noticed during those times my sketchbook almost becomes a little more functional. Like I'll use it to just quickly, like this kind of thing. I don't know. Just these are actually some notes for an animation that I'm working on. So that were coming up during a Zoom call with the collaborators that I'm working with, you know, and so this isn't even in my sketchbook, you know, it's just on my desk because I'm spending so much time here. And so, but a lot of times a sketchbook for me is very kind of problem solving. And then other times, a sketchbook is something that I like very like, you know, carry with me all the time, no matter what the cost. I thought about it as like, you know, being a half Japanese guy, it was like the samurai, you know, always have your sword with you. You know, like someone's gonna get you, you got to be ready. Kind of like it was like the soul of my life, you know, to have this with me at all times and to really be ready to work, or, you know, because you never know when inspiration is going to come or what, and to really kind of just collect things without necessarily knowing if they're going to add up. And just as a real quick, I pulled one of the sketchbooks off my shelf. This is from June of 2009. So I would, you know, write the date. That's something that I started doing on top of these things, because I would go through so many sketchbooks once I got going, you know, and we'll talk a little bit about that maybe, but like once I got going, I would just burn through these things, especially if I was doing a lot of creative work, that more the latter thing, because I was drawing every day, you know, all the time. And I wasn't just drawing, you know, I'd be writing. And so, but just as so I can show more of this kind of later, but this is an example of just a preparatory sketch for a comic that I did. And so, you know, this is the rough of it. And I've always been surprised at how much that rough can become that when you see the finished version of it is completely exactly the same as the rough. It's just finished. It's just been polished up. So, well, Jeffrey, let me turn that question around a little bit, because that's a great question. How do you use it?
Yeah, I mean, it's changed like you throughout the years. For a long time, I didn't really know what a sketchbook really was or how other people had used them. You know, like when I was little, I had notebook, or actually mostly I would draw on loose leaf sheets of paper from the printer, you know, so I'd be in like free period in class in middle school or something like that. And I would have like, I would go to the printer, I would pull out these blank sheets, which to me were like extremely liberating, because every other sheet that's handed to you in school has like, you know, dictates how you're supposed to sort of fill it in or use it. And so all of a sudden it's like, I have this pencil and I have this blank sheet. And so weirdly, I don't know if anybody else had this experience in grade school, but like my free period was often me also just having a blank page and like messing around with friends. So I would play little games with my friends where, you know, we would draw like a triangle and try to make sure those triangles all connected. Like you could only draw triangles kinds of games. I also used to draw comics, just like no thumbnailing or anything, just like draw the boxes, draw the characters, draw the words. Then I would fold the paper up and I would like kind of draw a circle around it, like pretending it was like a seal, you know, and then write the name of the comic on it and then like give it to a friend or something and be like, check out this cool, my new comic, you know? I kind of like realized I was interested in drawing and like sort of thinking that way, and was doing it a lot in school. And often on the back of my papers, I would doodle and stuff. But it wasn't really until I kind of was encouraged by people to keep a sketchbook and kind of told about it, not just as like an object, you know, because a blank book is nothing to you, but the idea of a sketchbook is something that kind of what you were saying, Miles, is a little bit closer to like, you were saying there was a period of time in which you kind of thought of it as like your samurai, part of your samurai gear, like an essential tool or like part of your soul or something. Or if you didn't have it with you, you weren't doing the work of the universe or God's work or something. Like you connected it to part of a bigger thing, right?
Totally.
And so I think that I didn't realize that for a very long time. I had to be taught that or kind of shown that. We have a question in the chat from Olivia. Are we making the sketchbook on the recitation Figma page in the same set of pages as the attendance? No, the book that the document that you make should be on your own Figma account. So basically create your own Figma document. Eventually we will ask you for a link to the final document, but your document will grow over time. And you can make other Figma documents on your account just for a day to sketch or whatever, but each Figma document can have multiple pages. And so your document can have multiple pages and you can organize it in different ways. You know, maybe every time we have a lecture, every Monday, you want to create a new page in that Figma document just for your notes about that lecture. But yeah, so, I mean, how do I use my sketchbook now? Like, there was a while when I wanted to make really beautiful sketchbooks, right? So like, I'll share with you kind of something sort of funny. There's a phenomenon, I'm sure some of you probably are familiar with this, on YouTube, of art students or would-be art students sharing their sketchbooks that they're applying to art school with. So you can see a lot of really interesting sketchbooks from art students. Now, when you apply to art, can everybody see this? Just kind of this video a little bit?
Yes.
This person flipping through their sketchbook, right? So when you apply to art school like Cal Arts or RISD, often part of your application is a sketchbook. And so this is a vision of a sketchbook in which your sketchbook is kind of like a beautiful like artifact that should somehow be perfect, right? And so you can see this person flipping through the sketchbook. And even though this page here that you see seems a little bit like messy, you can also see kind of how organized it is, right? And almost how composed everything is. Does that sort of make sense? Because the sketchbook is kind of part of a, you know, it's really just one artwork. You know, it's one object that's submitted for evaluation. So I went to art school and I was doing and there was a big culture of sketchbooks. And so every morning at breakfast in like the big cafeteria, like people would be like comparing their sketchbooks. This is kind of before social media. So like the equivalent of like posting on Instagram was like having a cool sketchbook page to like show around to people. So there was this whole economy of that. I was into that for a while, but as that culture kind of left me, as I left school, I still was keeping sketchbooks, but my practice evolved to the point where I was no longer interested in making these beautiful artifacts for impressing people in my community, because I had other ways of doing that. You know, I had Instagram, I had a website, I had other outlets. And so my sketchbooks became much more like really messy and kind of crazy. And I would also make a lot of finished drawings in other sketchbooks. So I would almost have two categories. I would have like a category for like finished drawings and then a category for like messy stuff. And I often label my sketchbooks in different ways. Let me, I can flip my video. So I often label my sketchbooks in different ways. This is the sketchbook I had when I came to SOU, and it's really tragic, you know. You can see kind of like just a little bit of details here of what actually goes on. And this is a book in which basically I just open to any page at any time and don't care what page I'm on. And I actually call it a scratch book. So it's still a book. I still have an idea of like what went on at this time, but this book is almost like purposely, I don't care what I do anywhere on any page. And then I have other sketchbooks with certain purposes. So for example, this is a more organized book in which I do these little videos in which I make drawings. And every single time I record a video for the drawing, it goes in this book. And so I have kind of a record of each of these drawings that I've made. And so this is like a very well-defined kind of like, this is what this book is for. Like, I sit down, the camera turns on, I make one of these little 5-minute drawings where I tell a story, and the book will never be used for anything else. And yeah, that's enough to kind of share, but just to show that, you know, these are like creative strategies for like how to deal with blank sheets of paper, you know. Yeah, I mean, I also keep I have a lot of you can probably see I have a lot of post-it notes all over the place too. So I still work on loose leaf, but I'm the kind of person who I'm writing and drawing most of the day. So I have like things all over the place. Yeah.
Cool. That's great. I mean, it's so interesting because I think one of the things that Jeffrey and I talked about and one of the questions which we could get to is well, maybe we should just turn that into one of the questions. Is who inspired your take on the sketchbook in a sense, or are there artists that use the sketchbook in ways that you learn from seeing their sketchbooks? Because it was interesting when you showed that the perfect sketchbook of that person, you know, that stuff always drove me absolutely insane. I could not deal with that. When I'd see people whose sketchbooks looked like that, I was like, what's wrong with these people? Yeah, I was always like, what's your problem? Like, why are you doing this? Like, not in like I wasn't being I was just kind of jealous. It's that kind of like, I'm small-minded and petty in that way. I'm kind of like, like it kind of gave me like a inferiority complex or something, you know, which is like, I always got really freaked out because my sketchbook didn't look that way, you know, and I'd always be like, I'm just not that good, in quotes, you know, good at drawing or something like that. Like for me, it's so much messier and weirder. And so I think there's something about, so I want to just kind of use that as the intro to the question, that were there artists that kind of broke something open for you or opened up a door for you when you saw their sketchbooks, and how that might have influenced you? Oops, you're muted.
Sorry, I was responding to a question in the chat just real quick.
Oh, cool. Nice.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. So like, how is it, like, what artists kind of, like, what kind of clicked for me, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna show you all one artist. The artist who I first kind of, you all can see my screen. So who knows this artist, Juan Miro? A lot of people probably know about this artist, this goofy surrealist artist. Made paintings kind of looking like this. Most of you have probably seen this, you know, this Picasso kind of like surreal doodling before. So I really liked Miro when I was in art school. I was interested in surrealism. I liked how the drawings were childlike and goofy, and I wondered why someone who was an old man would draw this way. It's one of the first people who I was like, like, why is this man who's dead, who is really old, still drawing these goofy things? And so I was interested in them for a number of reasons, but one of the things that I really learned about Miro is how they actually use how do they come up with their ideas, or how do they actually work? And so what Miro actually did was he had scraps of paper, not unlike some Post-it notes or whatever, but he would basically have a wad of scraps of paper that he would keep in his like coat pocket. And kind of sort of inside of those pieces of paper, he would have like a half a pencil, like a golf pencil, basically. And so when he walked around the world, you know, or went out and did his shopping, or, you know, met up with people, that's all he had. He basically had like, you know, almost like those slips that you get at the library, those little scrap slips to write down like the code of the book so you can go to the stacks and look it up. So that was like the extent of his like kind of like field sketchbook stuff. And he would look at stuff, like he would look at a tree and like draw kind of what he sort of like a little shape that reminded him of the tree. So he wasn't necessarily like trying to accurately draw things in this mode. And this was something that he developed later on in his life. It wasn't something that he always did. And now simultaneously, he had these big sketchbooks in his studio. So when he was working on large paintings, like these paintings sort of on the easel, he had a big book next to the palette of paint. And when he needed to actually wipe his brush off in order to get some new paint, he would often use the blank pages of the book in order to wipe the brush off. And that's how he would kind of get sort of jump started on the next piece, or get an idea for the next piece. So it's he has the image that he's working on, but then he also has this doodle space right next to it, So kind of the main space and then the scratch space. And I remember thinking wow, that's so interesting that this person who seems to draw in such a stupid, silly way has such a sophisticated idea about what their process is, and how they use this stuff. So yeah, that's a really, I think that's one good example for me. And then when I thought about that, I was like, whoa, what do I do? And I'm like, I don't really have any discipline about it, or I just do what someone told me to do. I never really invented my own way of doing that, or even thought about having two spaces at the same time, one for one thing, one for the other thing, when my attention shifts, or the fact that cleaning something off is also a way of starting to make something new. And, I always was really curious about that.
That's awesome. It's when you showed Miro, it almost brought tears to my eyes, actually, because when I was a kid, my grandparents had a Miro print hanging in their living room. And I just loved that freaking thing, and it was kind of, but I didn't know why, because I was a kid, and there was something about his work that really made sense to me. I just kind of got it. I never had a discussion about it. I never talked to my parents or my brother or my grandparents about this Miro. It was something that I was just seeing, and it was resonating. There was this vibration going on in my kid mind that was yes, and I think that's so much of I loved, it was Peter Schildall or something. He was talking about aesthetics. There's that word, I'll type it into the chat, aesthetics.
Oh man, aesthetic right now is really crazy, the term, because I don't know if you know this, but basically 12 to it's the term aesthetic is become a hashtag kind of subculture online.
Oh,
and it basically means some of the people some of you here in the class are probably familiar with this. If you look at aesthetic on Instagram or TikTok, or there's a lot of Roblox aesthetic games. And basically aesthetic now means pink, girly, glittery stuff.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Yeah. But from an art theory or art history perspective, it's obviously much more broad than that. But the term aesthetic has, there you go, Fritz in the chat, aesthetics with the spaces between.
Yeah,
that's exactly. Yeah. And so I've made posts. I've talked about aesthetics online on my TikTok, or mentioned it, and I've had children be like, "This is not aesthetic."
Yeah.
Seriously, what are you doing? This should not be in this category. So it's kind of funny to. Sorry to.
That's awesome. No, I love it. That's fantastic. That's exactly what we're. That's perfect for this conversation. That's great. It reminds me of David Kelly, who's an actor, longtime actor at the festival and everything, and he was teaching classes here at SOU, and great actor. And we were laughing one day at Case Coffee, and he was saying, I would say to my students, well, yeah, let's hook up, after class. And then his students were like, dude, you really shouldn't say that now. So it was funny because I guess, hooking up meant something different than from our generation. But so it's good. I love it. Aesthetics. Anyway, he described it, which is kind of related to aesthetics in the new usage. But it's like if you have a cat, and a lot of you guys probably have your cats with you, but and you pet the cat here, and the cat is going what's the cat thinking, right? So the cat's like, and the cat's like, well, I like that. Like, I don't know what it is, whatever, just don't stop doing it. And that, I think to me, that's kind of what aesthetics kind of are. There's some kind of resonance in your interior being or your physical body, or something's happening where you're just like, I just like this. I don't know. And I think when we go out into the air and the air is clean and the temperature is nice and the grass is blowing and things are just cool and you're out there, to me, that's aesthetic. Like that's like you're having this kind of an aesthetic experience where it's not about like how much money is that worth, or is that the way you do your taxes, or is that the way you conform to some kind of pre-existing concept of what you're supposed to be, but that there's something really, it's just kind of right, and you're right and you're okay, and to me that's that idea that art kind of affects me on that level. So when you showed those Miro's, I was like, I hadn't thought about Miro, like the serious artist, or like, I'm going to talk to you about art history today. It was just this kind of like resonance,
Yeah, I think like that kind of leads me to another question for you, Miles, which is like thinking about like, so do you have any kind of like ways of using a sketchbook that you've never tried, or like what would be like a dream method, or have you thought about like applying more discipline or a different kind of discipline to something, or any like unrealized visions for how you might use a sketchbook in the future?
That's a great question. And I think
every time you like buy a new sketchbook, you're like, this is pure or something. What do I do with this?
Yeah.
Well,
there are two, I just want to answer that in two ways. The first one is that I think I really appreciated when you came last year and I got a chance to see how you worked in your sketchbook. And this is a good example of like how I think probably the most important influences we'll end up having in a lot of ways are our peers, or the people that we are friends with, or that we work with, or we hang out with. And so for you guys, it'll probably be each other, but I like when I first met Jeffrey and saw the way that he was using his sketchbook, I was completely transfixed in that kind of Miro way of like, this is so cool. Like it was something. And I think one of the key things when you have that kind of vibration or that kind of like connection with someone's work is that they're illuminating something that you already do, that's inside of you. That's kind of been waiting to get out. And that's why I think for me, it's very emotional. Like I have this kind of like very intense emotional reaction, because it's like this kind of like sense of like relief or something to see it like. And so, when I just really appreciated that about how like you had this kind of deliberateness of like play, of like, oh, this is like a place, but it was also, you took it seriously. Like it was the idea that like, the sketchbook is the work. Like it doesn't have to become something else. Like you weren't, like the first example I showed is like, I'm going to do a sketch and then I'm going to fix it up. So for me, that was always a really elaborate process. And I can show an example of that, like where I go from a sketch to a comic, which involved all these different stages, like, inking and lettering and coloring. And then, or in 3D animation, it's like, okay, I've drawn a character. Now I have to model the character. Now I have to rig the character. Now I have to animate the character, and now I have to light the character. Now I have to render. There were so many steps to get to the finished thing. And so in Jeffrey's work, I saw this thing of like the sketchbook moment, like even to the point of it being happening in real time live, is the thing. And that was really powerful to me to see that. And I really was like, oh my God, that's what I've wanted. That's what I've been trying to do. Why haven't I just done that? Like I could do that today. And so I think for me that's been a big part. And so that I'm working on an animation now, and I'm almost been kind of like traumatized by animation, sometimes, like it's so much work. And so and I can get to the point where I don't really want to do it, because I'm like, I've been working all day. I've been doing all this stuff. I want to just go outside and like or I want to go back to that place that I used to have as a kid where I'd be drawing in the living room and no one was bugging me. And I was just sitting there and I was getting into my own feeling and experience of drawing. And so I think in the animation that I'm doing now, I'm trying to recapture that I'm saying like, let my animation be a sketchbook. So I'm using Blender a lot. And so I'm saying when I open that program up, which is a 3D, 2D program, I want to feel like anything can happen and not that I have this very detailed blueprint that I have to execute. So that's my answer to that. How about for you?
Yeah, I don't, ways in which I might be thinking about using a sketchbook that I haven't been.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, so Miles kind of hinted at some of the work that I do. I do a lot of performances where I draw. I draw a lot under a camera. A lot of that stuff is pretty disorganized in terms of how it kind of plays out. So like, here's another sketchbook of mine. I make a lot of TikTok videos where I do little drawings. And so when I'm recording, this sketchbook is kind of interesting because it's all about video recording. So I make these little drawings in the corners of the sketchbook and stuff. And when the recording fails or I don't use that take of a recording, I exit out. And then when one succeeds, I'll like circle it and be like, okay, that's the one that I ended up using. So it's like, this was a sketchbook that was just for recording stuff and always holding under a camera. And you can see it can get pretty crazy in different places. And there's little boxes everywhere. And that's because under the camera, you reframe things, right? So I'll have the camera on the sketchbook, but then it's only showing a part of the sketchbook. And so I'll draw a box and then draw inside the box. And usually that's for a live audience. So one of the ways in which I've been thinking about using a sketchbook more lately is actually defining what that page might be. So whenever I do my show, usually I have an idea of what I want to talk about or different activities that I want to do, but the actual artifacts that come out of that are really kind of gross, or like they're not necessarily gross, but they're messy and they're sprawling and they're disorganized. And so lately I was actually just talking last night to my roommate about how would I want to organize my show so that every day when I do an online show on TikTok every day. So every day when I do my show, how do I know, like, how do I time myself, or should I program things? Like the first 5 minutes is this, the next 10 minutes is that. And so I was talking to him last night and I realized that I could just think about the whole page of a sketchbook as one show. And it takes 30 minutes to fill out a page. And there's different things you can do on the page that are more organized. And there's other methods. And so I was like, well, maybe my live show can be like this weird journaling method or something, or somehow it's like about the creation of this page, like a theater stage or something. And then at the end of the show, I have a nice record of, everything I did in those 30 minutes. So yeah, we had funny ideas about like having a little agenda at the top of the page so that when people join the show, they see like, oh, they're right here now, but soon they're going to go there and they've already done this, and little symbols to represent that. And so, it's kind of, that's kind of something that interests me right now. But the other side of that is, the computer that I have is called a notebook, like MacBook, right? And so like maybe everyone can kind of think about that for a second before I turn this question towards Miles. Like, what's the difference between, we're asking you in this class to keep a notebook in Figma, but like that's like so virtual, right? Your actual computer is often called a notebook or seen as a sketchbook of some kind. So like there's a difference, I think, between like sketchbook or notebook as like an object, like kind of like we're talking about, like the book itself, and then what your discipline is or how you approach it. And so I think like the real sketchbook for me is just an idea that I can apply to different tools or physical forms, right? It's like a method or an approach to things. And that's really what changes. And the other thing that's really important to remember is like, where does your work like live? You know, like where's your like home base? You know, like where do you come up with all your best ideas? Some things that you might not share with other people. Like how do you kind of live creatively? Like, you know, like I personally live through like my pen and doodling, and all my ideas kind of come out of just doing that. You know, other people live more through typing or through other activities. And I feel like the sketchbook is a lot of times kind of where you're living creatively at the moment, you know. And so kind of the big question is like, where are you living right now creatively? You know, like how are you spending most of your creative time? What environment is it that you're living in the most, and that you're coming up with ideas in? Maybe you all can think about that for a few minutes, but I would also like to just shed a little bit more light on this aesthetic thing, because some of the people in the chat are saying like, oh, I didn't agree with Jeffrey's like take on that. But I think maybe that like I've seen some stuff that other people haven't really seen. So I kind of just wanted to share like sort of what I was talking about. Because when I said like, you know, aesthetic is like this weirdly this like girly thing right now, like, you know, pink glitter kind of stuff. And it's kind of being like taken over by content creators like as that. I just wanted to quickly like show sort of like the image of that just for a second, just so you all had an idea of what I was talking about. So here's a YouTube video, The Ultimate Guide on How to Be Aesthetic, which I thought was funny. It's not hugely popular, but there's a lot of other videos like this. And a big part of being aesthetic is a specific category. Like it's like what one would normally think of as an aesthetic is now becoming like, oh, if you want to be aesthetic, then just cuff your jeans, you know, then case closed.
Which I've done.
Yeah, we've all cuffed our jeans at different points. So here's another video, how to take aesthetic notes. So if you want your notes to be aesthetic, then this is like, you know, ways of doing that. And then I just also want to show Roblox. Roblox is a really popular game among kids. And if you just go to Roblox and search for the term aesthetic, you can see from these thumbnails that most of the term is for, you know, like for kind of what we would associate as like a, you know, like pink girly kind of frilly stuff, you know. And then also, you know, there's other things too, like aesthetic mall. So yeah, some people were saying vaporwave, you know, that's kind of part of it too. So there's kind of this gendered side to things, but it's not really what we would usually consider aesthetic as grown-ups or like think about as that term. So I just wanted to like bring, like kind of update the class on like what are 8th graders or like 5th graders right now, what do they think aesthetic is? They think it's this, you know? Yeah. And I personally think that's a problem. So it's something I'm like deeply concerned about and trying to maybe correct, you know, at times. Yeah.
I definitely think like the vaporwave stuff, like that stuff is something appreciated, but like I just think in general aesthetic is very broad. Like it's multiple categories, like people were saying, like what we're talking about. Yeah. The thing is, yeah,
for like aesthetic, aesthetic, I think it's just like a compilation of things, like a majority of things, or like things that you do, like some stuff you could do and be like, I think this is aesthetic to me, and then some people are like, no, this is. I guess it's like, if you think it's cool, like not everybody has to like it. You could think it's aesthetic, like
yeah, like
aesthetic
my mom
is
is an author and has an aesthetic for advertising.
Yeah.
Well, aesthetic is literally just the mood of a piece of media or like the design of it. Like aesthetic can literally be anything as long as it's like a coherent thing in a piece.
Yeah, like
people have like an entire aesthetic for their Animal Crossing island or their outfit or their like entire apartment.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I
Like-
guess we all, you know, most of us in this class, probably all of us don't have this relationship to the term aesthetic, right? We think of it as like a category of things that are visual or stylistic that could arrive at they could look like anything, right? Like my aesthetic could be, you know, watermelons on my head. Or something, you know what I mean? And I love watermelons, and my whole house is like watermelon aesthetic, you know. But that isn't what I see happening with culture, you know, like with the content that's being put out about this term. So that's kind of why I'm like, like it's pretty weird that this term is being reduced down to these very, very narrow visual worlds.
Yeah.
And I'm just afraid at what happens when those kids grow up and like think of aesthetic as like having a specific color, you know, or being like two kinds of things. Because really, you know, what we're talking about is it's a system. It's a theoretical term. It's something that's really useful. It's useful in design and art and thinking about a whole range of different visual material. It's a general idea, you know. It's very wide reaching. It doesn't really have a color, you know, or a shape.
Cool. Well, you know, I'm thinking this would be a great time, or maybe we should do our breakout groups to this, because I think people are, you know, ready to roll. And so I know we have stuff we wanted to cover and could do, but that's great. We've got a quarter to come back to it, but it'd be great to get people into some groups. And let's see. And then we can come back, because I think there are a lot of questions that have come up on the chat that we haven't had a chance to get to as well. And that out of the groups, out of your discussion, you can bring questions back. Several people might have the same question, and it can be functional stuff about the class. I know there are a lot of people in here that have been doing art their entire lives and keeping sketchbooks and everything. They're like, yeah, I got it, you know. But there are also going to be a lot of people, this might be the first time they've ever thought about this stuff. And so that there might be a lot of questions about how do I do the homework, you know, still. And so we want to have time for that as well. So why don't I'll go ahead and set up some breakout rooms here, which I just forgot how to do. There it is, breakout rooms. And
how long should we stay in them?
Give me a number. Go ahead, Jeffrey. What do you think?
Maybe 10 minutes.